What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So we get to finally talk about a specific brand of Samsung phones that I've only recently compared, and I never made full reviews of any of these. And we're going to start off with the Samsung Galaxy A10. Now, what's really cool about this device is it's one of Samsung's budget phone series. A long time ago, I reviewed the Samsung Galaxy A50. I think that's what it was called, and it was supposed to be like a budget phone kind of ish, but it really wasn't even that budgety. And that was like the A50 Alpha or something like that. I don't really remember the name. Maybe it was the A7. I don't remember because I have the new A50. Dude, I don't remember anymore. But I reviewed one of those phones, and now it's kind of funny I'm reviewing them again, but a whole different series of them. So the Galaxy A10 actually came out in February of 2019. So it's a little old now. It's not extremely old, but it's like about a year, which isn't that old at all. But I will say how that could be a disadvantage and how these phones might age a little bit differently, which I'll get into in a second. Now, looking on the front, we can see it has a 6.2-inch IPS panel. The resolution of this panel is 720 by 1520, and what's really cool about the panel is that for a budget phone like this, you're getting a not so budget design. So if you look at this, it actually doesn't look that bad of a design, and that screen resolution is not good. Okay, I don't like 720p displays in 2020 or even 2019, but I do have to give credit where it's due. This phone is not supposed to be a flagship phone. It's supposed to be a standard budget phone for most people to go and get. So what I will give credit to Samsung is to giving us that specific water drop design, whatever it's called, teardrop design on this display. So it doesn't have a huge notch. It has a little bit of bezel on the bottom and the sides, but it's not that big of a deal. This phone has a lot going for it in the design aspect for the price that you're paying. When I first got this thing and I got it delivered to me, I was like, wow, this thing actually looks a little bit more premium than I thought. And just a couple years ago, we saw that our budget phones were still super ugly. They weren't that good looking and all those things. And now this thing, even though it has an IPS panel, it does make it look like it's a little bit more premium than just a budget phone. So that's definitely a huge advantage for that. So I don't want to hate on it too much for not having an OLED because it's not really in that demographic. You can always go up to an A20 or A30, whichever ones of those have an OLED display, but I think the display is good enough as it is. You have a micro USB port on this phone, which I'm not a fan of. I wish there was USB Type-C. There's USB Type-C on the other A series device, but this one does not have those things, which does kind of suck. But on the back, a single camera setup, which is okay. Again, this is a budget phone. It's not a crazy huge flagship phone or anything like that. So you do have a micro SD card slot on this phone as well, which is really awesome. I love seeing that. Not a lot of phones have that capability anymore, but Samsung is luckily still keeping that in. Hopefully with the next series of A series devices, they keep those devices with those micro SD card slots as well. That'd be really, really cool. And in terms of the outside, that really pretty much covers it. Whenever I hold this phone in the hand or anything, it still feels like a pretty decent phone. Like I said, it's not supposed to be a budget phone. It's supposed to be your standard, okay, this is a phone from Walmart or phone from Best Buy. It was the cheapest one there. Let's go ahead and buy it for the kid or buy it for whoever. It's supposed to be a budget phone. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. Now let's get onto the software. So this is one of those things that might be a disadvantage for a few of you. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's a bad thing because it's really a good thing. First of all, this thing started off with Android Pie. It is set to get Android 10 or Android Q from Samsung. They even put it on their little list of devices that are going to get it, but it's not going to get it until a couple months from now, which is kind of weird because Android Q has been out for a while, and by the time Android 10 comes out, Android 11 is going to be around the corner a little bit. So at least the developer beta, so I don't really know what they're going on there, but regardless, this phone is going to be getting Android Q or Android 10, which is really awesome. But the only downside of this, which it's going to be kind of a push, but I don't know if this is going to get the next version of software on top of that. I have a hard time believing that Samsung is going to push another update on top of Android 10 even. So once Android 11 comes out, I have a feeling it's only going to go for the Samsung Galaxy S10. The S9 might be cut off, and it's going to go from there. So maybe the S series of devices will get multiple software updates, but the Samsung Galaxy A series devices like the A10, the A2030 will only get one software version. Now there's no way for me to verify this. This is just kind of something that I thought of, but it's just I would pose you the question, why would Samsung purposely go and push multiple updates to these older phones, which would then kind of be in competition to the newer flagships, because nobody's ever going to buy the newer flagships if, the budget phones can do pretty much the same things as the newer ones can. So in my opinion, I think Samsung might end it at Android 10. Again, I have no way to verify this, but if I had to say it, that might be the case. So hopefully that's not some sad news to you. You could probably find a root in custom ROM for it. on Android 11 or Android 12, hopefully in the future. That'd be really cool. Samsung really sold a lot of these too. This phone was pretty popular at the time, so that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the software standpoint. Now, hitting on the performance side of things, this thing was released with the Exynos 7884 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and there were two different models of the Samsung Galaxy A10, a 32 and another 32 gigabyte variant, but the only difference between them was that the base model had 2 gigabytes of RAM, the top tier model had 4 gigabytes of RAM. So if you want to get that top tier model, which I would highly recommend you to do, you can get that 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is pretty cool. Now, in my terms of me using the phone and everything, I do have the base model, the 2 gigabyte model, and I'll be honest, I didn't even really remember that this thing had 2 gigabytes of RAM. I thought it had at least 3 because when I was messing with it, it doesn't necessarily feel like a slow phone. The only times I noticed it slow was when I was actually kind of honestly paying attention to it and like actually like trying to test things. In terms of actually opening apps and everything is perfectly fine. I mean, you have to remember, I don't remember how much I paid for this thing, like $80 maybe. It's not a fast performing phone because it's not supposed to be a fast performing phone. It's supposed to be a budget phone, and anything on top of that is good. And I'm not saying budget phones have to be slow. There's a lot of phones out there that are fast. The Samsung Galaxy A10 I think is in that sweet spot. Surprisingly, for what you're paying for it, it's better than what I thought. I think that's the best way I can put it. And I've said this about a few other phones too. It's better than the way I thought. When you get it, you kind of assume, okay, it's probably not going to, do anything I really wanted to do. It's not going to be able to game or anything like that. But it does handle things for the most part pretty decently. But really the only downside and the biggest downside of this phone would definitely be that RAM. With phones nowadays, I mean, the base models are having like 6 to 8 gigabytes of RAM for the base bottom tier model. Look at the S10e. With phones like back in the day, it was probably at like even like 3 or 4. The Galaxy S8 started off with 4, you know what I mean? Even the S7 had 3, and I think the S6 had 3 as well. The S5 had 2. So this phone has the same amount of RAM as the Galaxy S5, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, and that's a really huge downside. It doesn't really matter like how fast the RAM is or whatever the case is. This thing has a small amount of RAM, which really doesn't go well with the future ability of this device. It probably won't last as long as you might think. If you get this phone now, you might not be able to use it that long because you might be sick and tired of the performance. So what I'll tell you is that yes, the phone's performance is okay, but that's currently, once it's done, maybe in like a couple months getting software support or something, you might have a different story. You might not want to use it anymore, which I wouldn't blame you, but that is something you're going to have to keep in mind. I don't think it's a deal breaker or anything, especially if you're looking for a budget phone, but for how this phone is priced right now, you can probably get a comparable phone on Amazon for pretty cheap or around the same price that's older. So that's a huge thing to keep in mind right there. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it. Now, hitting on the cameras, this thing was released with a 13 megapixel camera, a single camera on the back, and a 5 megapixel camera on the front. Now, what I can tell you about this camera is that at least the front camera is good enough. I would say, it is bad, but it's not like horrible, so I'll give it that. But that back camera can only shoot 1080p videos, but it's funny because that UI of the camera looks exactly the same as like the Galaxy S8s and Galaxy S10s, so it kind of threw me off because it wasn't really as good as it. I mean, it's an okay sensor, but don't be expecting to get like S10 quality photos because that is not the case. The biggest downside of this camera though, first of all, it cannot shoot 4K videos, and it can't even do 1080p at 60 frames as far as I know. But the biggest downside is the amount of camera sensors you have on this device. Like I've stated, in this day and age, you really have to have at least like 2 camera sensors to be up top to compare to like all these other phones that are coming out, because all these phones have multiple camera sensors. Even the Pixel line, which they waited so long to put it in digital camera sensor in it, but even that phone has an extra camera sensor or 2. And with phones like the Samsung Galaxy A10, you don't necessarily have that capability, so that's really going to make it feel older than it really is. When I picked it up, I was like, man, this phone, I mean, it looks newer, but the camera sensor kind of throws me off because it's an older type of camera sensor. So it's not a deal breaker, it's not a crazy thing, but that's an extremely important thing to know. That is one thing you have to keep in mind when you're going to look for something like this. So if you're picking up an A10, just know the camera is definitely average or a little bit below average for sure. So that kind of covers it up in terms of the camera standpoint. Now, ending it off with the battery life. Now in 2020, this battery life is actually really decent, okay? And it is a 3400 milliamp hour battery. You can probably still buy these things new, so it probably hasn't degraded that much in the box. I did buy mine used, but I don't think mine degraded that much. But this battery life is definitely one of its biggest assets for sure. So first of all, it's a 3400 milliamp hour battery. I think it's the same size as the Galaxy S10, and that's actually a very decently sized battery life for this phone. You have to keep in mind, I mean, this thing is not supposed to be like the biggest like powerful phone. It doesn't have like a 1440p display. It has a 720p display, and it's not that powerful. And even though the display is kind of big, it's not a high resolution panel, and it doesn't really have those many pixels to push. So that is a huge advantage for the battery life. It saves a lot of power, and the battery life is definitely one of its main advantages. It's one of its biggest assets for sure. And even now in 2020, I mean, this battery life is really, really good. And to kind of answer the question and to sum up the video, is the Samsung Galaxy A10 still worth it in 2020? What I can tell you is I do think the Samsung Galaxy A10 is worth it to some people. Whoever wants to buy a brand new budget phone, this is really one of your main choices. You don't really have too many choices in the brand new market that's as wide ranging as this. I mean, you can pick this thing up at Walmart, at probably so many other stores, Best Buy, all these different stores. Whereas if you really want to look for a Galaxy S8 or something, you can't look for those in the stores that often. But if I were you, I would probably at least pick up a Galaxy S9 or even a Galaxy S8. I would rather have those phones, even an S8, over the A10. And I think I made a comparison on those two. The S10, even though it's not getting software support anymore, is still a very good phone, and I would probably end up rooting in a custom ROM just because of that hardware in and of itself. You're getting a much better screen, much better build quality, and all those things. And even on Amazon, the A10 is selling for about $160. You can get an S8 for like probably around that same price too. So I'll go ahead and find the cheapest S8s and A10s on Amazon. I'll link them down in the description below so you guys can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it would mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.